The planet of Arendar had always been quiet. Its skies glowed with soft shades of purple and gold every dawn, and the twin moons reflected silver light over forests that stretched for thousands of miles. The people of Arendar were peaceful by nature. They lived in small, organized communities, relying on technology that balanced efficiency with sustainability. Their cities were built not to dominate nature, but to exist alongside it. Homes were constructed from lightweight, durable materials that shimmered under the sun, while transportation relied on silent, hovering vehicles that left trails of soft light in their wake. Life here was measured calm and predictable for generations. The inhabitants of Arendar had focused on knowledge, science, and exploration, but only within their own system. The universe beyond their skies was a distant mystery. Tales of dangerous stars, strange worlds, and aggressive alien species existed only in books and old legends. While the elders spoke of caution, few truly feared what might lie beyond. The majority of people believed that the small, peaceful world they called home was safe. Children played along crystal-clear rivers. Farmers cultivated glowing crops that thrived in the unique soil, and scientists conducted experiments in laboratories that hummed softly with energy. Nothing suggested that disaster was looming on the horizon, in the heart of the main city. Called Luther, a group of scientists worked on the communication towers that reached high into the sky. These towers weren't just ordinary signals. They were designed to send and receive data across the stars. The scientists had been experimenting with deep space transmissions, attempting to detect signs of life in faraway systems. Among them was Dr. Alara Venn, a meticulous and curious researcher whose mind always raced with questions about the universe. She had spent years analyzing faint signals from distant points, searching for patterns, for meaning, for anything that might indicate intelligent life beyond Arendar. Her team included engineers who could make almost anything, strategists who considered every possible scenario, and young prodigies whose skills exceeded their years. Together, they formed a tight-knit group devoted to understanding the unknown. Despite the sophistication of their technology, the team lived with a sense of controlled caution. They had protocols for emergencies, simulations for potential alien contact, and contingency plans for natural disasters. Yet all of this preparation was limited to theoretical possibilities. No one had truly faced a crisis on the scale that would soon arrive. The inhabitants of Arendar had grown comfortable in their routines, believing that danger was something seen only in stories or far-off galaxies. People woke, worked, and slept according to a rhythm that had persisted for decades. Markets opened with the morning sun, schools and laboratories bustled with quiet energy, and families shared meals in warm, light-filled homes. It was a life of simplicity, of calm, and of confidence that their world was safe. But that calm was about to change. In the weeks leading up to the first signs of trouble, subtle anomalies began appearing. Instruments detected strange gravitational fluctuations, minor distortions in the space-time continuum that puzzled even the most experienced scientists. Satellites recorded faint flashes of energy from distant quadrants, flashes that didn't match known cosmic patterns. Meteors with unusual trajectories passed unusually close to Arendar, but without causing any direct harm. At first, these incidents were dismissed as natural cosmic events, yet a lingering unease began to spread among the scientific community. Dr. Venn and her team watched the data grow more complex, patterns emerging in ways that made little sense. They debated endlessly whether these were random phenomena or harbingers of something far more dangerous. The general population remained unaware. Life went on as usual. Children still ran across the luminous fields outside Luther, chasing each other as parents watched from nearby homes. Markets thrived, filled with vibrant goods and the laughter of people enjoying simple pleasures. Festivals continued, celebrating the twin moons and the changing seasons. Yet beneath this ordinary life, a subtle tension had begun to creep into the air. The scientists and strategists were tense, sometimes meeting late at night in dimly lit labs, discussing what could not yet be fully understood. They prepared plans quietly, not wanting to alarm the public. But each new piece of data added to their growing anxiety. One evening, as the twin moons rose and bathed the city in silver light, Dr. Venn stood atop the tallest communication tower, watching the stars with a mixture of awe and unease. For decades, she had looked at the universe as a field of opportunity, a place to explore and learn. Now she saw something different, something that hinted at unknown dangers waiting just beyond the horizon. She thought of her colleagues, of the families she cared about, and of the entire planet that might be completely unprepared for what was coming. The sensation was unlike anything she had felt before, a mixture of fascination, fear, and a quiet urgency that demanded attention. The first real warning came when a faint signal was detected on the outermost receiver arrays. It was weak and distorted, barely recognizable as an intentional transmission. The pattern was unlike anything the scientists had ever seen. It repeated at intervals, almost as if it were trying to communicate, but the meaning was impossible to decode. Some members of the team speculated that it was an alien probe, a scout, or even a distress signal from another system. Others feared it could be a precursor to something hostile, a warning they had been unable to anticipate. The debate was heated, and for the first time in years, disagreements between the team members grew intense. They were intelligent, educated, and usually calm, but now every interpretation carried high stakes. Every decision could mean survival or total annihilation. As days passed, more signals appeared. They were faint, scattered, and erratic, but impossible to ignore. The scientists intensified their efforts, trying to trace their origin, to analyze their patterns, and to understand their purpose. They began working in shifts around the clock, poring over data that grew increasingly complex. Meanwhile, the city of Luther continued its peaceful rhythm, unaware of the invisible tension building above and around them. Citizens carried on with their routines, enjoying markets, schools, and festivals, oblivious to the ominous signals drifting through the vacuum of space. Amid all this, Dr. Venn realized something critical. The signals, if left unchecked, could represent either a monumental opportunity or an unimaginable danger. They had never considered that simply receiving a signal could put the planet at risk. She understood that knowledge alone was not enough. Interpretation mattered, and the wrong assumption could prove catastrophic. The realization weighed heavily on her. She held emergency meetings, gathered her team, outlined every possible scenario from benign alien contact to full-scale invasion. Every precaution was considered, yet every precaution felt insufficient in the face of the unknown. Despite their advanced technology, the people of Arendar were still, in many ways, vulnerable. Their isolation, once a source of comfort, now seemed like a weakness in this atmosphere of quiet anxiety. Tension continued to build. Dr. Venn and her colleagues became more vigilant, scanning skies, monitoring signals, and rehearsing potential emergency procedures. The rest of the planet, however, remained blissfully unaware. Markets continued to thrive, children played under starlit skies, and festivals marked the passing of time. The contrast between the calm life of the people and the rising storms sensed by the scientists created a sense of dramatic irony, universe on the brink, while its inhabitants remained unaware. It was a delicate balance, a fragile calm that would not last for long. Eventually, subtle warnings of space anomalies and mysterious signals foreshadowed a new reality. The stage was set for events that would challenge the very survival of Arendar. The inhabitants, confident in their peaceful existence, could not yet imagine the dangers approaching their skies. Scientists like Dr. Venn sensed the growing threat, but even they could not predict how drastic the consequences of this calm before the storm would be. Life continued its ordinary rhythm, but beneath the surface, every pulse of data, every flicker in the sky, every faint signal whispered a warning. The universe was far more dangerous than anyone on Arendar had ever realized. The planet's tranquil days were numbered, and soon, the consequences of ignoring or misreading the signs of the cosmos has become painfully clear. Asterisk, the peaceful life on Arendar began to unravel faster than anyone could have imagined. The faint signals and strange anomalies that scientists had been tracking were only the first hints of a looming crisis. At first, many believed these disturbances could be explained naturally cosmic storms. Meteor showers, or unusual planetary alignments. But as days turned into nights and nights back into days, the signs became impossible to ignore. Gravity readings fluctuated unpredictably. Satellites recorded bursts of unknown energy, and minor quakes shook the surface in areas previously thought stable. The scientists, led by Dr. Alara Vin, realized that these events were connected to something far beyond their planet of force approaching, deliberate and potentially catastrophic. In the labs of Luthor, the city's central hub of technology and research, the team worked tirelessly to understand the signals. Every message they intercepted from the depths of space was different, yet carried a haunting consistency. A pattern that seemed almost intentional. Their machines analyzed the data, trying to translate the sequences into something comprehensible. Yet every solution brought more questions than answers. The scientists were forced to confront a frightening possibility. These signals might not just be warnings, they could be invitations or triggers for something unimaginable. The uncertainty gnawed at their minds, leaving little room for sleep or distraction. Even the most rational and disciplined members of the team felt the creeping anxiety that had begun to settle over the planet, while the scientific community wrestled with these growing concerns. The people of Arendar remained blissfully unaware. Markets buzzed with life, children ran across luminous fields playing games, and families gathered in warm homes as twilight descended. The contrast between the oblivious populace and the heightened vigilance of the scientists created a quiet tension that seemed almost invisible, yet incredibly palpable. It was as though the planet itself held its breath, waiting for something the majority could not yet see or understand. One evening, as the twin moons cast their familiar silver glow over the city, Dr. Ven and her team finally made a discovery that sent waves of urgency through the lab. They had deciphered a fragment of one of the signals, a tiny portion that suggested intelligence behind the transmissions. It was deliberate, precise, and unmistakably organized. But the content was troubling. It hinted at danger rather than help. Panic began to ripple through the team as they realized that the unknown source could already be aware of Arendar's position, tracking the planet with intent. The data indicated a potential arrival from a distant system, one that could reach their world far faster than anyone had anticipated. The scientists understood that the quiet, peaceful life they had always relied on was about to be shattered. The decision was made to act. The leaders of Arendar convened in the High Council chambers, a place reserved for matters of utmost importance. They faced a dilemma unlike any they had ever encountered. There were very few allies within their known galaxy, and even fewer with the capacity to respond to an interstellar threat. After long debates weighing risk against survival, the Council agreed that the only viable option was to send a massive SOS signal into deep space. The transmission would carry not just a call for assistance, but the planet's exact location. It was a desperate move, a gamble that could either save them or bring even greater danger. Preparation for the SOS consumed days. Engineers worked tirelessly to amplify the signal, using every available resource to ensure that it could travel across vast distances of space. The transmission included detailed coordinates, descriptions of the planet's defenses, and a plea for immediate aid. It was broadcast with every available frequency. Reaching into parts of the galaxy that had never been contacted before, Dr. Ven and her team watched with nervous anticipation as the message pulsed outward, knowing that once it was sent, it could not be undone. The feeling was electric and adrenaline-fueled mixture of hope, fear, and uncertainty. As the SOS signal traveled through the vastness of space, the people of Arendar waited. Anxiety, previously confined to the labs and council chambers, began to ripple outward. Rumors started circulating among the population's strange lights in the sky, distant flashes that seemed unnatural, and an unexplainable tension that settled over the cities. Some dismissed these signs as imagination, while others felt a growing unease they could not explain. The atmosphere became heavy with anticipation, a quiet storm of anxiety that hung in the air. Almost tangible in its weight, days passed with little visible change. The SOS signal had left the planet, but no response came immediately. The waiting was agonizing. Scientists monitored every frequency, every transmission, hoping for a reply that could assure them of assistance. Meanwhile, small anomalies continued in usual meteor patterns, faint energy pulses, and gravitational shifts. It became clear that the act of sending the SOS might have triggered a response from something far larger, more powerful than they could have imagined. The realization settled like a cold shadow over the planet. Reaching out for help might have already drawn attention to Arender from forces they were unprepared to face. As tension mounted, fear began to seep into everyday life. People noticed subtle changes in the sky's faint glows on the horizon, irregular movement of stars, and distant flashes of light that no telescope or satellite could fully explain. Parents held their children closer at night. While market activity slowed as the citizens subconsciously prepared for the unknown, the scientists, once purely focused on research, now became part of an emergency effort to educate and prepare the population. Evacuation plans were drafted, shelters reinforced, and emergency supplies stockpiled, all under the cloak of trying not to cause mass panic. Every action was a delicate balance between readiness and preserving the fragile peace of a population, still largely unaware of the severity of the threat. Then, a breakthrough occurred. Dr. Venn and her team detected a faint, rapid response through a distant frequency. It was unlike anything they had seen, a signal powerful, precise, and unmistakably deliberate. Its origin was outside any known friendly system. The characteristics of the transmission suggested a civilization capable of both incredible technological sophistication and terrifying aggression. The team realized that the SOS had indeed reached intelligent life, but whether that life was benevolent or hostile remained unknown. Panic spread quietly through the labs as the implications sank in. They had acted out of desperation, sending a plea for help into the void, and now the response was on its way. The consequences of that decision were unknown, but the certainty of change was absolute. The people of Arender could not yet grasp the gravity of the situation. Life continued its routine, but beneath the surface, an invisible current of fear and anticipation ran through the cities. Children played under skies that seemed a little darker. Markets thrummed with nervous energy, and families whispered quietly of strange occurrences that no one could fully explain. The once peaceful planet had entered a state of heightened alert, though most remained oblivious to the cosmic forces aligning against them. Every day brought new signs of change, a small tremor here, a faint light there, and the persistent hum of anticipation that everyone could feel, even if they could not yet name it. The SOS, intended as a lifeline, had transformed the planet's destiny. Dr. Venn and her team continued to monitor, analyze, and prepare, knowing that the unknown force responding to their call could arrive at any moment. Fear, hope, and uncertainty intertwined, creating an atmosphere of tense expectancy. The quiet, predictable world of Arender had ended the moment the SOS left their planet. A chain of events had been set in motion, one that could bring salvation, destruction, or something far worse. As the days stretched on and the response drew nearer, every mind on the planet, scientist, leader, and citizen alike, was touched by the growing awareness that their world would never be the same again. The SOS had gone out, desperate and uncalculated, carrying with it the promise of help and the risk of unimaginable danger. The inhabitants of Arender waited, unaware of the enormity of what they had unleashed. Their peaceful lives were on the brink of chaos, balanced on the edge of fear and hope. Every star in the sky, every distant flash, every subtle anomaly now carried a new meaning. The planet had called out into the infinite void, and the universe had begun to answer. What would arrive in response, no one could yet know. But the course of history for Arender had been irrevocably changed. The peaceful skies of Arender had grown restless. For days, scientists had monitored the faint response to their SOS, unsure of what to expect. Then, without warning, the first signs appeared. Distant points of light, barely visible at first, began to gather along the horizon. At first, people thought it was an unusual meteor shower or distant satellites, but Dr. Alara Venn and her team knew better. The energy readings were massive, far beyond anything their instruments had ever detected. The SOS had been answered not by friends, but by a force that exuded power, precision, and imminent threat. The people of Arendar watched the skies with a mix of awe and unease. As the light points grew closer, the scale of what was coming became terrifyingly clear. Enormous ships appeared, their metallic surfaces glinting under the twin moons, reflecting cold, harsh light. The ships were unlike anything the inhabitants had ever seen. They were not designed for exploration, trade, or diplomacy. They were instruments of war, massive in size, bristling with weaponry, and capable of devastation on an unimaginable scale. The scientists recognized them immediately. The designs matched descriptions from ancient legends and scattered interstellar records of the Deathworlders, a species feared across multiple galaxies for their cruelty and unstoppable military power. Panic rippled across Arendar. Citizens ran through the streets, looking for loved ones and searching for safety, but nowhere offered true protection. The city's once symbols of harmony and progress now seemed fragile under the looming threat. The people had lived their lives believing the universe was distant, vast, and mostly benign. That belief was shattered in the moment the Deathworlders arrived. The first salvo of warning shots struck, just beyond the outer settlements. Massive explosions sending plumes of energy and debris into the skies. Panic turned into terror, and the peaceful routines of the planet dissolved into chaos. Dr. Ven and her team sprang into action, desperately trying to understand the Deathworlders' approach. They had anticipated a need for defense, but no simulation had prepared them for the scale and efficiency of this invasion. The Deathworlders moved with precise coordination, their fleets advancing in formations that optimized both offense and defense. Communication arrays and surveillance satellites were the first to fall, disabled in seconds by concentrated energy beams that sliced through the planet's protective technology. The scientists realized that traditional defenses would be useless. Their only hope lay in innovation, improvisation, sheer determination. The leaders of Arendar convened in emergency meetings, urgently discussing evacuation plans and defensive strategies. Yet every option seemed insufficient. The population was vast, the Deathworlders' technology advanced, and time was running out. The SOS, intended as a plea for aid, had inadvertently marked the planet for total war. The inhabitants faced the horrifying reality that their world, once calm and safe, was now a battlefield. Streets emptied, homes were abandoned, and citizens fled toward makeshift shelters and hidden strongholds. Families huddled together, some in disbelief, some in tears. As the first wave of attacks reached the surface, the Deathworlders advanced relentlessly. Their ships unleashed devastating energy pulses that obliterated buildings, forests, and infrastructure in a matter of minutes. Entire city blocks were reduced to molten debris, and communication lines were cut with precision. The sheer speed and brutality of the assault left the people of Arendar stunned. Even as panic spread, some individuals tried to resist, forming small groups to defend neighborhoods or protect evacuation routes. But resistance was costly. The Deathworlders showed no mercy, crushing attempts at defense with overwhelming firepower and tactical efficiency. Every act of bravery was met with a response that demonstrated the invaders' relentless superiority. Amid the chaos, Dr. Ven and her closest colleagues worked tirelessly to salvage whatever could be used to slow the Deathworlders' advance. They converted civilian vehicles into emergency transports, jury-rigged energy shields to protect critical zones, and attempted to hack or disrupt the enemy's communications. These efforts were temporary, stopgap measures at best, but they provided brief moments of hope and safety. Citizens rallied around them, inspired by the determination and courage of those scientists who refused to succumb to despair. Children, elderly citizens, and workers became part of a collective effort to survive. To delay the inevitable and to protect whatever remained of their homes, the scale of destruction was staggering. Forests that had stood for centuries were scorched to ash. Rivers boiled under concentrated energy beams. Entire mountain ranges were scarred with craters where the Deathworlders had tested their weapons. The once beautiful planet, known for its glowing landscapes and shimmering cities, was transformed into a chaotic scene of fire, smoke, and devastation. Even as despair threatened to overwhelm the people, a quiet resilience began to emerge. Citizens improvised shelters, shared supplies, and communicated in secret, learning to move undetected and to protect themselves in small, coordinated groups. Survival became the only priority, and the people adapted faster than the invaders had anticipated. Despite the overwhelming odds, moments of heroism emerged. Small squads of volunteers risked their lives to evacuate civilians from danger zones. Scientists developed emergency energy shields that saved neighborhoods from total destruction, and engineers rigged decoy transmissions to confuse the Deathworlders' targeting systems. These acts, though seemingly minor in the face of total war, became critical in preserving human life. The contrast between the relentless assault of the Deathworlders and the ingenuity and courage of the Arendorians highlighted both the horror of the invasion and the strength of the human or sentient spirit. Dr. Venn reflected on the consequences of their desperate plea for help had drawn the attention of a force far beyond their understanding, and now their planet was paying the price. Every decision, every calculation, and every action had immediate and deadly consequences. The Deathworlders were not merely responding, they were exploiting the SOS as an opportunity, completing the call as an invitation or even a challenge. What had been intended as a lifeline had become a beacon for total war. The scientists understood that survival depended on adapting, learning, and outthinking an enemy whose power seemed limitless. Meanwhile, the civilian population experienced the horror of invasion firsthand. Families were separated as panic swept through the cities. Communities that had thrived for decades were reduced to ruins in hours. The psychological toll was immense. People witnessed destruction, loss, and death at a scale that no training, story, or simulation could prepare them for. Fear became a constant companion, yet so did determination. Citizens who had never imagined themselves as leaders or fighters found courage they did not know they possessed. The instinct to survive, to protect loved ones, and to adapt to impossible circumstances drove acts of bravery across the planet. As the Deathworlders advanced, the Arendorians faced a new reality. Their defenses, no matter how clever or courageous, were temporary. The invaders' firepower and tactical precision meant that no area was truly safe. Yet the people persisted, improvising, resisting, and holding on to hope. However fragile it might be, Dr. Venn's team continued to coordinate emergency efforts, communicate with isolated groups, and monitor the enemy, trying to find patterns or weaknesses. Every moment of respite allowed more citizens to escape or survive, turning desperation into strategy. Through it all, the planet itself seemed to respond to the chaos. Forests, rivers, and mountains became both obstacles and allies in the struggle. Arendorians used natural terrain to their advantage, creating ambush points, temporary shelters, and safe passageways. The very land that had nurtured generations now served as a battleground, forcing the inhabitants to merge ancient knowledge of their environment with advanced technology to resist the Deathworlders' overwhelming force. Even in the face of total war, adaptation became survival, and ingenuity became hope. The first wave of the Deathworlders eventually passed, leaving behind a planet scarred, burning, and transformed. Entire regions were unrecognizable, with only fragments of cities, forests, and infrastructure remaining. The survivors emerged from shelters, injured but alive, to witness the scale of the devastation. Panic and despair mixed with relief and determination. The people had endured the initial assault, but the war was far from over. The SOS had brought not salvation, but a cataclysm. Yet even in the ruins, the spirit of the Arendorians remained. They began to regroup, to salvage what they could, and to prepare for the next phase of survival. In this moment, Dr. Venn understood the grim lesson of their actions. Desperation can summon unimaginable forces, and the universe does not respond kindly to weakness or naivety. The SOS had been a desperate plea, but it had also been a beacon, drawing the Deathworlders to their doorstep. The planet's peaceful life had ended. What remained was a struggle to endure, to adapt, and to survive against an enemy whose power seemed limitless. Yet amid the chaos, there was also a spark of recognition that even in total war, Courage, intelligence, and resilience could endure, shaping the future even in the face of overwhelming odds. And so, Arender faced a new reality. The Deathworlders had arrived, and total war had begun. Destruction, fear, and chaos dominated the surface. Yet the people of the planet, driven by survival and hope, began to respond. The first wave of conflict had taught them valuable lessons about the enemy, their vulnerabilities, and the limits of their own courage. The battle had begun, and the planet would never be the same. The SOS intended to save them. It brought them the ultimate test stand. Their struggle for survival had only just begun. Asterisk. The first wave of the Deathworlders' attack had left Arender shattered and burning. Entire cities had been reduced to ash, forests scarred, and rivers boiled under the energy beams of the alien fleet. Yet amid the devastation, the spirit of the people refused to break. Survivors emerged from shelters, their faces smudged with soot and fear, but their eyes burning with determination. They knew that surrender was not an option. The Deathworlders would show no mercy, and their only hope lay in resistance. However desperate it might be, Dr. Alara Venn and her team became the central figures in this effort. Though scientists by training, they now acted as strategists, organizers, and engineers of survival. In the aftermath of the initial assault, they quickly realized that conventional defenses were useless. The Deathworlders' technology far outstripped anything Arender could deploy. Their energy shields, weapons, and ships were designed to obliterate entire regions within minutes. Direct confrontation was impossible. Instead, the inhabitants needed to adapt, improvise, and frise in ways that leveraged their intimate knowledge of the planet and its resources. Small groups of survivors began forming militias. Farmers who had once tended glowing crops now carried improvised weapons. Children, teenagers, and elders all found ways to contribute, whether by scouting, relaying messages, or assisting in repairs. The city of Luther became a hub of frantic activity. Laboratories were converted into command centers and weapon workshops. Engineers dismantled civilian vehicles and repurposed their energy cores into defensive tools. Streets once filled with laughter and trade now echoed with the sounds of construction, training, and urgent communication. Every person, regardless of their previous occupation, was part of the effort to resist. The Deathworlders advanced relentlessly, their fleets patrolling the skies with precision. They deployed energy drones, scanning for signs of resistance and targeting any concentrations of survivors. The people quickly learned that staying visible meant death. Ambushes, decoys, and guerrilla tactics became essential. Groups moved in coordinated patterns, using underground tunnels, forest cover, and mountainous terrain to evade detection. Even small victories, a destroyed drone, a temporarily disabled targeting station, or a misfired energy beam brought hope. They were proof that the Deathworlders, though overwhelmingly powerful, were not infallible. Dr. Venn and her team focused on creating defensive technologies that could provide temporary reprieves. Makeshift energy shields, scavenged weaponry, and hacked drones became part of the arsenal. None could match the Deathworlders' firepower, but they could slow the enemy's advance, protect civilians, and buy precious time. Every successful defense allowed more people to evacuate or regroup. Engineers worked around the clock, sometimes sleeping only a few hours before returning to their stations, driven by the knowledge that a single mistake could cost hundreds of lives. The population's courage grew in response to necessity. Ordinary citizens became heroes. A group of children, guided by older survivors, managed to disable a Deathworlder scout drone using a combination of agility, misdirection, and jury-rigged EMP devices. Farmers learned to camouflage fields and hide supply routes. Medics improvised triage centers in abandoned buildings, stabilizing the wounded while under the constant threat of energy strikes. Every small act of ingenuity contributed to a larger strategy of survival. The people began to understand that they could not win in conventional terms, but they could endure, disrupt, and survive long enough to see the battle shift in their favor. Communication was key. Survivors used improvised networks of runners, coded lights, and short-range signals to stay in contact. Dr. Venn's team developed temporary encryption systems to prevent the Deathworlders from intercepting messages. Coordination allowed groups to set traps, mislead patrols, and share resources efficiently. Every success, no matter how small, boosted morale and reinforced the belief that resistance was possible. Even in the face of overwhelming destruction, hope persisted. Yet the cost was immense. Entire neighborhoods were lost in ambushes, food supplies were destroyed, and water systems contaminated by energy blasts. Citizens witnessed the loss of friends, family, and homes. The psychological strain was immense, and maintaining morale became as critical as building defenses. Leaders emerged not only in the laboratories but in the streets, people who could inspire courage, organize escape routes, and make quick decisions under pressure. Their presence reminded the survivors that they were not powerless. Even against an alien force that seemed invincible, Dr. Venn understood that adaptability was the only way to survive. She and her team began experimenting with the Deathworlders' technology whenever possible. Abandoned drones, weapon fragments, and damaged ships were scavenged and repurposed. Every insight into the enemy's methods became a tool for survival. For example, by studying the energy signatures of the Deathworlders' targeting systems, they could predict strike patterns and set up temporary safe zones. By observing fleet movements, they could plan ambushes or escape routes. Knowledge, ingenuity, and quick thinking became weapons as vital as any physical armament. The natural landscape of Arendar became an ally. Dense forests, deep canyons, and river valleys provided cover for survivors. Makeshift fortifications were built in caves and abandoned industrial complexes. Traps and decoys slowed the Deathworlders' advance, forcing them to expend energy and resources to locate the hidden pockets of resistance. Guerrilla tactics became standard: hit-and-run attacks, temporary sabotage of drones, and careful use of energy pulses to create distractions. The Deathworlders' precision could not fully account for the unpredictability of human or sentient resistance and creativity. As the days of resistance stretched on, the population began to bond in ways previously unimaginable. Communities that had never interacted before collaborated out of necessity. Skills were shared, knowledge passed quickly, and strangers became family. Children acted as messengers, or scouts. The elderly shared wisdom about terrain and survival. And engineers trained anyone willing to learn how to manipulate energy devices. The chaos of war fostered unity, resilience, and a deep sense of purpose. Every life saved, every drone destroyed, and every temporary safe zone established became a testament to their willpower and courage. Despite these efforts, the Deathworlders' might was overwhelming. Their fleets continued to patrol and strike relentlessly. Every victory was temporary, every safe zone fragile. The survivors quickly learned that endurance, not confrontation, was their only real strategy. Evacuation plans were constantly updated, and mobility became essential. Groups split into smaller units to remain harder to detect. Supplies were carefully rationed, and every decision carried the weight of potential life or death consequences. The people of Arendar adapted to a new reality, one in which constant vigilance, improvisation, and courage were necessary for survival. Throughout this desperate struggle, Dr. Venn remained a central figure. Her leadership, knowledge, and calm under pressure inspired others to act decisively. She coordinated defenses, monitored the enemy, and guided civilians through dangerous territory. Her ability to combine scientific insight with practical strategy made a significant difference in the survival rate of the population. The laboratories, once centers of learning and research, had transformed into command hubs and tactical planning centers. Dr. Venn's presence was a symbol of hope, demonstrating that intelligence, courage, and resilience could counter, even temporarily, the overwhelming force of the Deathworlders. Even as despair threatened to overwhelm, small victories fueled hope. A sabotaged drone, a hidden supply route, or a successfully evacuated group of civilians became celebrated moments. Stories of heroism spread, reinforcing morale. The people began to understand that while they could not destroy the Deathworlders, they could endure, resist, and protect as many lives as possible. Each day of survival was a triumph. To each act of ingenuity, a statement of defiance. As the weeks passed, the situation remained dire, but under careful management by the survivors. The Deathworlders' fleet dominated the skies, yet the planet was far from entirely conquered. Survivors had learned to move, hide, and fight with cunning. They had learned the value of intelligence, improvisation, and solidarity. What had started as panic had evolved into organized resistance. The people of Arendar had discovered strengths they had never known existed: the courage to face overwhelming odds, the creativity to survive, and the unity to endure total war. This saga was not about defeating the Deathworlders. It was about survival, resilience, and the indomitable spirit of the people. The inhabitants had faced the most terrifying force imaginable, endured devastating losses, and yet continued to fight in whatever ways they could. Improvisation, courage, and adaptation became their weapons, and every moment of survival was a small victory in a war they could not yet hope to win. The planet, scarred and battered, had endured. Its people had endured, and in that endurance lay the promise that even in the face of total war, life, courage, and hope could persist. The battle had finally slowed. The Deathworlders, after weeks of relentless assault and destruction, began to retreat. It was not a victory for the people of Arendar, for the planet had been left scarred, cities reduced to rubble, and countless lives lost. Yet there was a fragile sense of relief, a pause, however temporary. From the terror that had dominated every hour, every breath, every heartbeat, survivors cautiously emerged from shelters and hiding places, stepping into a world that looked familiar yet unrecognizable. The twin moons still shone in the sky, but their light now fell on a landscape marked by fire, smoke, and devastation. Nature itself seemed altered, the once vibrant forests charred and rivers carrying ash instead of crystal water. The people of Arendar walked through the ruins with heavy hearts, their eyes filled with grief, disbelief, and determination. Dr. Alara Venn moved among the survivors, her mind racing with plans and possibilities. She knew that the retreat of the Deathworlders did not mean safety. Their presence had demonstrated a power so vast that any complacency could be fatal. The survivors needed to rebuild, to learn, and to prepare for a future where the threat of return was ever present. Communication networks had to be restored, medical centers reestablished, and essential services rebuilt. The city of Luthor, once a shining example of technological achievement and harmony with nature, now lay in ruins, a stark reminder of how fragile even the most advanced civilizations could be in the face of overwhelming force. The psychological impact on the survivors was immense. Families mourned the loss of loved ones. Children wandered through debris, searching for familiar faces and places. Adults struggled with guilt, grief, and the burden of survival. The trauma of the invasion was not limited to physical destruction. It reached deep into the hearts and minds of every inhabitant. Dr. Venn and her team recognized that recovery would require more than rebuilding. Infrastructure it would require healing the spirit of the people, restoring hope, and fostering resilience. They began organizing counseling sessions, community gatherings, educational programs to teach younger generations the lessons learned from the present catastrophe. Reconstruction began slowly. Survivors cleared debris from streets, salvaged materials from destroyed buildings, and repurposed damaged technology. Makeshift shelters were built to house families who had lost their homes. Engineers and scientists worked tirelessly to repair communication arrays, water systems, and energy grids. Even amid despair, the people of Arendar demonstrated remarkable ingenuity. Farms were replanted, rivers cleaned, and forests replanted where possible. Communities organized labor and resources with incredible efficiency, proving that even in the aftermath of total war, life could endure, adapt, and grow. Dr. Venn understood that one of the most critical lessons was the danger of desperation. The SOS that had triggered the arrival of the Deathworlders had been a desperate act, intended to save the planet. Instead, it had brought unimaginable destruction. The leaders of Arendar reflected on the consequences of reaching out blindly, realizing that communication with unknown forces carried risks they had not fully anticipated. The planet had survived, but at an enormous cost. Every decision, every action, and every moment of desperation carried consequences that could echo across generations. The survivors understood that hope must be tempered with caution, courage with wisdom. Amid the ruins, stories of heroism and resilience emerged. Ordinary citizens had performed extraordinary acts during the conflict. Children had carried messages through dangerous territory. Farmers had transformed their fields into safe passages. Medics had worked tirelessly under bombardment to save the wounded. Engineers had repurposed civilian technology to create temporary defenses. These stories became part of the collective memory of Arendar, a testament to the courage, ingenuity, and determination of its people. Even as they mourned the dead, survivors celebrated the living, drawing strength from the fact that humanity, or whatever species inhabited, Arendar had endured against a force that seemed unstoppable. The natural environment also played a crucial role in recovery. Charred forests and damaged landscapes required careful attention. The people learned to work with the land rather than against it, planting new trees, rerouting rivers, and creating safe zones amidst areas of destruction. The trauma of war left scars, but it also fostered a deeper connection to the planet itself. Survivors understood that Arendar was both a home and a living ally. Respecting its terrain, utilizing its resources, and understanding its rhythms became essential for long-term survival. Lessons learned from the invasion reshaped society. The scientists and engineers, once primarily focused on research and exploration, now took on new roles as protectors, strategists, and advisors. Military and civilian structures were reorganized to respond to emergencies more effectively. Education emphasized critical thinking, problem-solving, and survival skills. The society that emerged from the ashes was more resilient, more cautious, and more united. The memory of the Deathworlders' attack ensured that complacency would never again threaten the planet's survival. Yet fear remained. The people knew that the Deathworlders could return, that the universe contained forces beyond their control, and that survival required constant vigilance. Patrols and monitoring systems were established, shelters reinforced, and communication networks maintained. Communities practiced drills and rehearsed evacuation plans. Children were educated not only in science and culture, but also in strategy and survival. The memory of total war became a permanent part of life, shaping the behaviors, decisions, and values of the population. The survivors understood that the SOS had been a lesson written in fire, and they were determined not to repeat its mistakes. Dr. Venn continued to lead, balancing the need for recovery with the imperative of preparation. She and her team studied the remnants of the Deathworlders' technology, hoping to learn, adapt, and prevent future catastrophes. Every fragment of data, every piece of wreckage, provided insight into the alien invaders' capabilities and strategies. The survivors recognized that understanding the enemy, even in their absence, was crucial for long-term survival. Knowledge became both a shield and a weapon, a way to transform trauma into power and helplessness into agency. The psychological and cultural impact of the invasion also became evident. Art, literature, and storytelling shifted to reflect the experience of survival, resilience, and loss. Songs, paintings, and stories chronicled the events, preserving the lessons learned for future generations. Children grew up hearing accounts of bravery, resourcefulness, and the consequences of desperation. These narratives instilled values of courage, caution, and community. They ensured that the SOS and its aftermath would not be forgotten. Embedding the experience into the very identity of Arendar's people, over time the planet began to heal, slowly but surely. Nature reclaimed some of the destroyed areas while human ingenuity restored others. New settlements were built with lessons from the past in mind: better planning, safer locations, and emergency systems integrated into every aspect of life. Trade, communication, and cultural activities resumed, albeit with a constant awareness of the fragility of their world. The survivors had endured total war, and their society emerged stronger, wiser, and more united than before. Dr. Venn reflected on the long journey from the SOS to survival. The desperate call for help had been a gamble with unimaginable stakes. It had brought death, destruction, and chaos. But it had also revealed the extraordinary capacity of the inhabitants to endure, adapt, and rise from the ashes. The lessons were clear. Desperation must be tempered with caution, balanced with strategy, and courage paired with ingenuity. Every life saved, every small victory, and every act of resilience mattered. For together, they created the foundation of survival in a universe that was far larger, more dangerous, and less forgiving than anyone had imagined. It was about survival, adaptation, and the profound lessons learned through suffering and resilience. The people of Arendar understood that life was precious, fragile, and worth protecting at any cost. They had faced the most terrifying force imaginable, endured unimaginable loss, and yet continued to rebuild and prepare for the future. Their world would never be the same. But the spirit of its people remained unbroken, a testament to endurance, courage, and the power of learning from hardship. And so, the story concluded with a sober reflection. The SOS that had been sent in desperation had changed everything. It had brought death and chaos, but it had also revealed the strength, ingenuity, and resilience of the people. They had survived total war, learned the cost of uncalculated actions, and emerged with a deeper understanding of themselves, their world, and the universe around them. The planet of Arendar would continue, scarred but alive. Its people would carry forward the hard-earned lessons of survival, resilience, and the careful balance between hope and caution.